What if I told you that an extraterrestrial being didn't come here to destroy us, but to reveal what the church has been hiding about Jesus for 2,000 years? I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about a 74-year-old man in Montana who saved a dying alien in 1983 and discovered something that religious institutions have buried since the beginning, that Christ's miracles weren't supernatural magic. They were frequencies of coherent love that any human consciousness can access. For 40 years, Walter protected this being from the government, and in those 4 decades underground, this creature showed him the scientific truth behind divine power, something that would collapse the boundaries between spirituality and quantum physics, something that once you see it, there's no going back to comfortable Sunday prayers. This will shatter everything you thought you knew about faith, but it might also awaken abilities within you that organized religion convinced you were reserved only for saints. If you're ready to see what the feds tried to bury when they raided that Montana farm, subscribe and hit the bell. Because what happened when they finally found that alien will prove that divinity was never about obedience, it was always about frequency. Now let me tell you how a dying extraterrestrial became Walter's greatest teacher. Walter Briggs was 74 years old and lived alone in his rural Montana home. The house stood at the end of a gravel road that hadn't seen another vehicle in weeks, maybe months. Walter had stopped counting. He spent his days fixing old machines to fill the silence, carburetors that didn't need fixing, transmissions he'd already rebuilt twice. It didn't matter what it was, as long as his hands stayed busy and his mind stayed quiet. The death of his brother in the 80s had left marks too deep to heal. It happened at the factory, a machinery malfunction. Walter was the senior engineer that day. He signed off on the equipment inspection. 3 hours later, his younger brother was gone. He'd walked away from his family after that. Couldn't stand the way they looked at him at the funeral, like they wanted to forgive him but couldn't quite manage it. Or maybe that was just his own guilt reflected back. He carried that guilt like a weight chained to his chest. Some nights he'd wake up gasping, feeling the pressure of it crushing his ribs. Other nights, he wouldn't sleep at all, just stare at the ceiling and replay that morning over and over. The clipboard, his signature, the confidence he'd felt that everything was safe. Walter avoided churches, prayers, and any mention of God. He used to believe, used to pray every morning before work, used to think there was a plan, a purpose, a loving hand guiding everything. But after the accident, faith felt like a cruel joke. What kind of God let that happen? What kind of mercy allowed a good man to die because of a signature on a form? So he stopped praying, stopped going to Sunday service, stopped pretending he believed in anything beyond the cold, mechanical certainty of cause and effect. He lived like a ghost inside his own mechanical routine. Wake up, coffee, workshop, lunch, workshop, dinner, television he didn't watch, sleep that never really came. Repeat. The days blurred together into a gray sameness that felt safer than feeling anything real. The field around his house reflected his growing loneliness. Fences that needed mending, grass grown wild and unkempt. The barn door hung crooked on rusted hinges, everything slowly falling apart, just like him, nature reclaiming what he no longer had the energy to maintain. He feared old age and feared death even more. 74 felt ancient. His joints ached in the morning. His hands shook when he held small tools. His vision blurred at the edges. Every new pain felt like a preview of the end. And the end terrified him because he didn't know what came after. Didn't believe in heaven anymore. Couldn't shake the fear that maybe there was just nothing. Walter believed he was a broken man beyond repair. Some things you can't fix. Some damage goes too deep. He'd accepted that about himself years ago. Accepted that he'd carry his brother's death until his own. Accepted that he'd die alone in this house with nothing but regrets and machines that outlasted their usefulness. Winter was approaching, and the house felt colder than usual. Not just the temperature, something else, a heaviness in the air, like the season itself was pressing down on the walls. He'd turned the heat up twice already, but still felt the chill in his bones. Night arrived with a silence that squeezed the soul. No wind, no animals, no distant highway sounds. Just emptiness so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Walter stood at the kitchen window with his coffee gone cold, staring out at nothing. A sudden blackout killed the lights in the house and across the horizon. The refrigerator hummed into silence. The porch light died. Even the distant glow from the neighbor's place 3 miles away vanished completely. Darkness swallowed everything in an instant. Walter lit a lantern without imagining what was coming. His hand moved on autopilot, muscle memory from decades of power outages in rural Montana. The flame caught. Yellow light pushed back the shadows. He lifted it to look out the window again. The dark sky was about to split his life in half. He didn't know it yet, couldn't have known. But standing there in the silence with that lantern in his hand, Walter Briggs was living the last moments of the man he'd been for 40 years. Everything was about to change. The wind roared like it was announcing something ancient. It came from nowhere. 1 second, dead silence. The next, a howl that shook the windows and bent the trees sideways. Walter grabbed the door frame to steady himself. This wasn't normal Montana weather. This was something else. A flash of light crossed the sky at impossible speed, faster than any plane, faster than anything he'd ever seen. A streak of white fire that left a burning trail across the black. Walter's breath caught in his throat. His engineer's mind tried to calculate trajectory and velocity, but came up empty. The burning object carved through the field like a cut of fire. It wasn't falling, it was crashing, coming down hard and fast with the kind of violence that meant nothing inside would survive. The light intensified as it dropped below the tree line. For a moment, the whole field lit up bright as noon. Walter heard the impact echo through the distant hills. A deep wrong sound. Metal screaming, earth splitting. The kind of noise that rattles your teeth and makes your stomach drop. Then the wind died completely, like the world was holding its breath to see what happened next. Instinct, fear, and curiosity forced him outside. His body moved before his brain caught up. Grabbed his coat. Grabbed the lantern. Boots on without tying them. The cold hit him hard, but he barely noticed. Something had just fallen from the sky onto his property. He had to see. The lantern shook in his aging hand. His heart hammered against his ribs. 74-year-old legs carried him faster than they had in years. Across the porch, down the steps, into the field where the grass crunched under his boots. The air tasted electric. In the middle of the pasture there was smoke and pulsing light. Not firelight, something cleaner, bluer. It pulsed like a heartbeat, growing dim, then bright, then dim again. The smoke smelled wrong, metallic, sharp, nothing like wood or fuel burning. The air reeked of ozone and scorched metal. The smell burned Walter's nostrils and coated his throat. He'd worked around machinery his whole life, but never smelled anything quite like this. It reminded him of arc welders and lightning strikes and something else he couldn't name. He approached, feeling his heart trying to escape his chest. Every step took effort. Part of him screamed to turn around, go back inside, call someone. But who? And say what? That something fell from the sky? That there was a craft in his field glowing like nothing earthly? Among the wreckage, something moved slowly. Walter froze. The lantern light caught movement in the smoke. Small, deliberate, not mechanical, alive. It was a small form, gray, fragile, no more than 4 feet tall, thin limbs, smooth skin the color of ash. It struggled to push itself up from the torn earth, then collapsed again. Hurt, maybe dying. The black eyes reflected a silent pain. They turned toward Walter, huge and dark and deeper than anything he'd ever seen. No whites. No pupils he could distinguish, just black that seemed to pull light into it. And in that blackness, unmistakable suffering. The being trembled, trying to crawl away. It thought he was a threat. One thin arm reached forward, dragging its body an inch through the dirt. Then it stopped, too weak to continue. Its head turned back toward him, watching, waiting. Walter heard a phrase inside his mind. Please, don't turn me in. Not words, not sound. Something that appeared directly in his thoughts like it had always been there. Gentle, desperate, completely clear. The voice of something dying, asking for mercy. Compassion defeated fear in that instant. Walter dropped to his knees beside the being, set the lantern down, reached out with shaking hands, not to harm, but to help. Because whatever this thing was, wherever it came from, it was hurt and alone and asking for kindness. And Walter Briggs knew exactly what that felt like. Walter carried the being in his arms like someone saving a child. The weight surprised him. So light, almost hollow, like holding a bird with bones made of air. He cradled it carefully against his chest, feeling the strange coolness of its skin through his shirt. The being didn't resist, just went limp in his grip, trusting completely. He descended the narrow stairs to his underground workshop. The basement had been his sanctuary for decades, where he went to think, to work, to hide from memories that followed him everywhere else. Concrete walls, low ceiling, the smell of oil and metal, a single bulb hanging from a wire, safe, private. No one ever came down here. He placed it on the workbench where he repaired old engines, cleared away the scattered tools and greasy rags with one arm while supporting the being with the other, laid it down as gently as he could on the scarred wooden surface. The being's head turned slightly, those black eyes tracking his movements. The gray skin felt cold as wet stone. Walter touched its arm to steady it and pulled his hand back instinctively. Not just cool, actually cold. Like touching something that had been underground for years, but it was alive. He could feel a faint pulse under his fingertips. Slow, steady, nothing like a human heartbeat. Ariel transmitted short phrases directly into his mind. Pain, fall, fear. The words appeared in Walter's thoughts without sound. Simple, clear, each one carrying weight beyond its meaning. He could feel the truth of them. The being wasn't just telling him what it felt. It was sharing the actual sensation. Walter found tools and improvised bandages. His hands moved on instinct. Clean rags from the cabinet, rubbing alcohol, tape. The same supplies he'd used on himself after countless workshop accidents. He didn't know if human first aid would work on whatever this was, but he had to try something. The being watched each gesture with pained serenity. No flinching when Walter cleaned the wounds. No crying out. Just those enormous eyes following his hands. There was intelligence there, deep and old. Walter felt like he was being observed by something that understood more than it could possibly explain. The workshop became a silent refuge for two different worlds. The storm still raged outside. Rain hammered the small basement window near the ceiling, but down here, it felt separate, protected, like the concrete walls created a space outside normal reality, a place where a 74-year-old man could tend to an injured alien and have it somehow make sense. The weak light revealed strange cuts and bruises, not the kind of injuries Walter recognized. The cuts didn't bleed red, something darker, almost black, and they sealed themselves as he watched, slowly, like the skin was remembering how to be whole. The bruises shifted colors he didn't have names for. Walter hesitated, remembering the government and local paranoia. His mind raced. What if someone saw the crash? What if there were satellites tracking it? He thought about the stories. Roswell, Area 51, men in black suits showing up at farms and making people disappear. His hand paused over the being's shoulder. The being asked only for shelter, not worship. Hide me, that's all. No prayers, no ceremonies. Just hide me. The words came softer now, weaker. Walter realized it was using tremendous energy just to communicate. It wasn't asking to be treated as a god, wasn't demanding anything, just begging to be kept safe. The initial fear became silent responsibility. Something shifted in Walter's chest. This being needed him. For the first time in decades, something actually needed him to show up, to be present, to care about whether it lived or died. The weight of that settled on his shoulders and somehow felt lighter than the guilt he'd been carrying. The storm continued, hiding everything outside. Thunder rolled across the Montana hills. Lightning flashed through the small window. Perfect cover. No one would come looking tonight. No helicopters. No search parties. Just weather violent enough to keep the world away. Walter realized his life would never return to normal. He looked down at the gray being on his workbench, at its chest rising and falling with breath, at its long fingers curled against its side, at the impossible reality of what was happening in his basement. There was no going back from this, no pretending it didn't happen, no returning to the safe numbness of fixing carburetors and avoiding memories. He'd touched something from beyond the sky, carried it in his arms, made a choice to protect it. Everything had changed. The old Walter Briggs died the moment he decided to help. The man who believed he was beyond repair. The man who thought his life was finished and meaningless. That man was gone. Someone new was being born in this concrete basement. Walter pulled up an old stool and sat beside the workbench, watching, waiting, not knowing what came next, but knowing he wouldn't leave. Couldn't leave. This strange, fragile being needed him, and Walter Briggs hadn't been needed in 40 years. Ariel regained strength over the days in the basement. not quickly. It took nearly a week before the being could sit up without assistance, 2 weeks before it could stand. Walter brought food and water, though the being barely touched either. It seemed to absorb something from the air itself, energy Walter couldn't see. Its eyes conveyed unusual calm as it watched Walter. There was patience in that gaze, deep and infinite, like it had all the time in the universe and no urgency whatsoever. Walter found it unsettling at first, then comforting. The being never judged his fumbling attempts to help, never showed frustration, just observed with quiet gratitude. Telepathic communication made their conversations direct and profound. After the first week, the words came clearer, fuller, not just fragments, but complete thoughts flowing from Ariel's mind into Walter's. It felt intimate, like the being was speaking from inside his own skull. Nothing hidden, no room for misunderstanding. The being spoke of the accident and the danger of being captured. My vessel malfunctioned during passage. I didn't mean to come here, didn't mean to crash. But now that I have, there are those who would dissect me to understand me, trap me to weaponize me. I've seen what your governments do with things they don't understand. Walter nodded. He'd heard the stories too, believed maybe a quarter of them. Now he wasn't sure what to believe. Walter in turn spoke of his guilt about his brother. He didn't plan to, didn't mean to open that wound with a stranger from the stars. But Ariel asked him why he lived alone, why he seemed so heavy, and the words came pouring out. The factory, the signature, the funeral, the 40 years of carrying it. Ariel explained that human pain is also energy. Everything is energy, thought, emotion, memory. Your guilt isn't just a feeling. It's a frequency you've been broadcasting for decades. It affects your cells, your heart, the field around your body. Pain you don't release becomes pain you embody. Walter stared at the being. I don't understand. Guilt makes the inner field sick, Ariel said. The words appeared gentle, but absolute. No judgment in them, just statement of fact, like explaining gravity to someone who'd been falling their whole life without knowing why. The gray spoke of unity, not punishment. Your religions taught you that God punishes sin, that suffering is deserved. But consciousness doesn't work that way. There's no angry father in the sky keeping score. There's only energy responding to energy. Frequency matching frequency. You punish yourself, and the universe reflects it back. Walter tried to process that serene wisdom. It contradicted everything he'd learned in Sunday school, everything his mother taught him about sin and redemption. But something about it resonated, felt truer than the angry God he'd been avoiding for 40 years. So what do I do? Walter asked. Change the frequency. Forgive yourself. Not because you earned it, because holding on to guilt serves no one. Not you, not your brother, not the universe. That's when Ariel mentioned Jesus for the first time. Walter froze, feeling old faith knock on a door he'd sealed shut. His whole body went rigid on the stool. Jesus. He hadn't thought that name in years without flinching. Hadn't let himself think about the man he'd once tried to follow. The carpenter who supposedly died for everyone's sins while Walter still carried his own. What about Jesus? His voice came out harder than intended. The being said Jesus spoke to universal consciousness. He understood what I'm telling you, that love is the fundamental frequency, that thoughts create reality, that humans have power they've forgotten. He tried to teach it. Your institutions turned it into religion instead. Walter's hands gripped his knees. Jesus was the Son of God. Jesus was consciousness operating at its highest level, fully human, fully awakened, showing what's possible when you remember what you are. Love is coherent frequency capable of healing matter. The words dropped into Walter's mind like stones into still water. Ripples spread through his understanding. Love wasn't just emotion. It was force, physics, technology. Jesus didn't perform miracles by breaking natural law. He performed them by understanding how consciousness and matter actually interact. Walter listened without being able to look away. His engineer's brain wanted to reject it. Too strange, too far from everything he'd believed. But another part of him, something deeper, recognized truth, felt it resonate in his chest like a tuning fork struck in the right key. Show me, Walter whispered. The workshop became an improvised temple that night. Ariel raised one thin hand. The air between them seemed to thicken, warm. Walter felt pressure against his chest, not physical, something else, like standing near something powerful and invisible. His guilt began to crack, just slightly, just enough to let light through. And for the first time in 40 years, Walter Briggs felt something besides weight pressing on his heart. He felt hope. In a silent dawn, Ariel asked Walter to close his eyes. They'd been talking for hours. Walter's back ached from sitting on the stool. His coffee had gone cold 3 times, but he couldn't stop listening. Every word from the being felt like water to a man dying of thirst. "There's something you need to see," Ariel said into his mind. "But you have to trust me. Close your eyes. Don't open them until I tell you." Walter hesitated, then nodded, let his eyelids drop. A golden light flooded the underground workshop. Even through closed eyes, Walter saw it, felt it, warm and bright and absolutely impossible. The kind of light that shouldn't exist in a concrete basement with one dim bulb. His first instinct was to open his eyes, check if something was on fire. "Keep them closed," Ariel's voice steadied him. "Just feel." The temperature rose, gentle as a summer dawn. Heat spread across Walter's face, down his neck, across his shoulders, but not uncomfortable, not burning, like standing in perfect morning sunlight after a long, cold night. His muscles relaxed. Tension he didn't know he was holding released from his spine. A luminous silhouette took form before them. Walter sensed it more than saw it. A presence, tall, human-shaped, made entirely of that golden light. It stood between him and Ariel, radiating something that made the air itself feel sacred. Walter recognized it immediately. It was Jesus. He knew without being told, knew with absolute certainty that transcended logic or doubt. The figure standing in his basement workshop was the same man he'd prayed to as a child, the same face from Sunday school illustrations, but alive, real, present. The figure radiated peace that dissolved fear and guilt. Walter felt it like a physical force. The weight he'd carried for 40 years began to lift, not all at once, not completely, but enough that he could breathe deeper than he had in decades. The constant pressure on his chest eased. Ariel explained that the vision was a projection of consciousness, not a ghost, not a resurrection, pure consciousness taking form. Jesus exists in a frequency accessible to those who open themselves. What you're seeing is real, just not physical in the way you understand physical. The Christ looked at Walter like someone seeing beyond time. Those eyes, golden and infinite and utterly compassionate, they looked at Walter and seemed to see everything, every mistake, every regret, every moment of pain and anger and self-hatred, and there was no judgment in that gaze, only recognition, only love. The light wrapped around his chest like a touch of mercy. Walter gasped, felt something warm and solid press against his heart. Not hands, not physical contact, but real nonetheless. The sensation moved through his ribcage, spread into his lungs, flowed through his bloodstream, touching places inside him that had been frozen for years. Walter felt decades of pain begin to yield. The memory of his brother's death, the funeral, the look on his mother's face, the signature on the safety form, all of it rose to the surface. But instead of crushing him like it always did, the pain began to soften, began to transform into something else, something bearable. Jesus didn't speak through words, but through pure feeling. No voice, no sound, just emotion and knowing transferred directly into Walter's consciousness. Understanding without explanation, truth without argument. The kind of communication that bypassed the brain entirely and spoke straight to the soul. You were never alone. The golden presence transmitted. The words weren't words. They were certainty. They were memory of every moment Walter had felt abandoned. And underneath each moment, a golden presence standing beside him, unnoticed, waiting, never leaving, never condemning, just loving, always loving. Walter cried like he hadn't cried since he was young, deep, racking sobs that came from his gut. His chest heaved. Tears poured down his weathered face. He didn't try to stop them, didn't feel embarrassed. Just let 40 years of grief pour out of him in that basement, while golden light held him together. The vision slowly dissipated in the air. The light dimmed gradually. The figure became transparent, then translucent, then just an after-image behind Walter's eyelids. The warmth remained a moment longer. Then that, too, faded. The basement returned to its normal temperature. "You can open your eyes now," Ariel said gently. The workshop returned to silence, but Walter was no longer the same. He opened his eyes, saw the concrete walls, the old workbench, the tools hanging on pegboards, everything exactly as it had been. But he was different, fundamentally, irreversibly, changed. The man who believed he was beyond repair had just been touched by divinity, not the angry God of his childhood, not the distant judge who kept score of sins, but something else entirely. Something that knew him completely and loved him anyway. Something that had been waiting 40 years for him to be ready to receive it. Walter looked at Ariel through tears. The gray being sat still on the workbench, those black eyes reflecting the single bulb overhead. Calm, patient, like nothing extraordinary had just happened. But Walter knew better. Was that real? His voice cracked. As real as anything you've ever experienced. More real than most things you call reality. Walter wiped his face with shaking hands, tried to process what had just occurred. Failed completely. Some experiences transcend understanding. You can only feel them. Let them change you. Trust that the transformation is real even when your mind can't explain it. He stood on unsteady legs, walked to the small basement window. Dawn was actually breaking outside. Real dawn. Natural light creeping across the Montana hills. But it looked different now. Everything looked different. The world hadn't changed. Walter had. And he knew with absolute certainty that he could never go back to who he was before. Ariel explained that miracles don't violate nature, they expand it. What Jesus did wasn't supernatural. It was supernatural, beyond what humans normally access, but still within natural law. He understood principles your science hasn't discovered yet. Consciousness affects matter. Intention shapes reality. Love heals at the quantum level. Walter listened like a lifelong student. His engineering mind wanted frameworks, mechanisms, explanations, and Ariel provided them. Not with equations or formulas, but with understanding that felt more solid than any math Walter had learned in college. Intention, compassion, and clarity alter matter. Those three elements together create coherent frequency. Most humans have intention without compassion, or compassion without clarity, or clarity without intention. Jesus mastered all three simultaneously. That's why his healings worked, why his presence changed people. Pure focused love expressed with absolute clarity of purpose. The Gray said the human heart is a powerful transmitter. Your heart generates electromagnetic fields measurable several feet beyond your body. When you feel authentic love, not neediness or attachment, but true unconditional compassion, that field becomes coherent, organized, powerful. It affects cells, DNA, the morphic field around other people. Walter's mind raced. So when Jesus healed people, he transmitted coherent love frequency that reminded their cells how to be healthy, reminded their consciousness of wholeness. The healing came from within them. He just provided the catalyst. Coherent love repairs memory and body. Walter sat forward on his stool. This was it, the key he'd been searching for without knowing it, the explanation for how faith could heal, how prayer could change outcomes. Not magic, not supernatural intervention, but consciousness operating at frequencies most people never accessed. His brother's death surfaced in Walter's mind like an old wound, without warning, without permission, just suddenly there. The image of the covered body, the sound of his mother weeping, the weight of knowing his signature had contributed to it. The guilt crashed over him like it always did. Ariel asked him to observe the guilt without judging it. Don't push it away. Don't try to fix it. Just watch it. Notice where you feel it in your body. Notice the thoughts attached to it. Observe like a scientist studying data. No judgment, just awareness. Walter tried. It felt impossible at first. The guilt demanded reaction, demanded he beat himself up, demanded he drown in shame. But he forced himself to just watch, to notice. The field around them seemed to vibrate softly. Walter felt it, a subtle humming in the air. Not sound, something else. Like the space itself was responding to their conversation, to his attention on the old wound. The concrete walls seemed to breathe. The workshop became a laboratory of consciousness. What you're feeling is your field shifting, Ariel explained. Awareness itself is transformative. When you observe pain without identifying with it, you create space. In that space, healing begins. Walter realized he'd been carrying accumulated sadness for decades, layer upon layer of it. Not just his brother. Everything. His failed marriage, His estrangement from his daughter, the friends who'd drifted away, the dreams he'd abandoned, the life he'd thought he'd have versus the life he'd actually lived, all of it compressed into a dense mass of grief sitting in his chest. Forgiveness begins when pain is accepted, the being said. Not accepted as deserved, accepted as real, as something that happened. You can't forgive what you won't acknowledge. You can't release what you're pretending doesn't hurt. Feel it fully, then let it transform. The old engineer began to breathe differently, deeper, slower, from his belly instead of his chest. Each exhale felt like releasing something. Each inhale felt like drawing in space, room, possibility. His shoulders dropped away from his ears. He felt his chest open like a long-locked door. Something that had been clenched tight for 40 years began to loosen, not gone, not healed completely, but opening, creating gaps where light could enter, where breath could move freely, where love could circulate instead of sitting stagnant and toxic. The frequency of love began to awaken in him. Walter felt it as a warmth spreading from his heart, different from the golden vision but related, gentler, quieter, more internal, like something dormant inside him was remembering how to function, how to flow, how to connect. Walter realized he was being healed from within, not by Ariel, not by Jesus, by his own consciousness responding to truth, to coherent love, to the simple act of observing pain without drowning in it. The healing wasn't being done to him. It was being activated within him, and that changed everything. Time passed, and Walter chose to hide Ariel for decades. It wasn't a decision made once. It was a decision made every single day. Every morning when he woke up and checked the basement. Every night when he locked the doors. Every time a car drove past on the distant road. The choice to protect this being became woven into the fabric of his life. He created routines to keep the being safe. Walter became methodical, paranoid in the healthiest way. He installed motion sensors around the property disguised as wildlife cameras, built a secondary entrance to the basement through the old root cellar, kept detailed logs of any unusual activity in the area. His engineering mind designed layers of security that left no trace. The government scoured the region searching for the fallen object. It started 2 weeks after the crash. Black SUVs on back roads, men in suits asking questions at the general store in town. Official-sounding inquiries about meteorite sightings. Walter heard the rumors, watched the search patterns, stayed quiet and unremarkable. Helicopters flew over the forest behind the house. The sound became familiar. That heavy whump, whump, whump cutting through Montana silence. Walter would hear them coming, and his heart would race. But he'd trained himself not to react. Just keep working, keep moving, act like a man with nothing to hide. Walter concealed tracks with an engineer's precision. He'd filled in the impact crater within days, redistributing soil to match the natural terrain, burned the fragments of the craft piece by piece in his wood stove, planted grass seed over disturbed earth. Within months, no visible evidence remained that anything had fallen from the sky onto his property. Ariel recovered completely, but avoided going outside. The being healed faster than Walter expected. Within 3 months, no trace of the injuries remained. But Ariel showed no desire to leave the basement. "I'm safe here," the being explained. "Your protection means I can rest, recover not just physically, but in other ways." Nighttime meetings occurred in the forest, away from prying eyes. After the first year, when Ariel was strong enough, they began taking careful walks. Always after midnight, always staying within the tree line. Walter would lead, listening for any sound that didn't belong. Ariel would follow, moving silently through the darkness like something made of shadow. The gray taught about consciousness, vibration, and unity. Those forest walks became Walter's real education. Ariel would point to trees and explain how their consciousness differed from human consciousness, but was no less real. Would show how thoughts created ripples in the field around them. Would demonstrate how intention could affect the behavior of animals passing nearby. Walter became more compassionate and less bitter. The change happened gradually, so slowly he didn't notice it himself until years had passed. But people in town started commenting, "You seem different, Walter. Lighter somehow." He'd just smile and shrug. How could he explain? How could he tell them he'd been learning about love from an alien in his basement? The pasture where the being had fallen became a meditation spot. Walter would go there in the mornings, stand where Ariel's craft had crashed, feel the energy that still lingered in that space. Something about that spot felt different, charged, sacred, like the veil between worlds had torn there and never completely healed. The underground workshop housed impossible technology. Ariel had salvaged pieces from the craft before Walter burned them, small devices that defied explanation, a sphere that generated light without power source, a crystalline structure that responded to thought, a metallic ribbon that changed temperature based on emotional state. Walter kept them hidden behind a false wall. Walter protected Ariel like a reborn brother. That's what it felt like, a second chance. The brother he'd lost had been taken by machinery and negligence. This being had been delivered to him by the universe itself. Protection became purpose, became redemption, became the most important thing Walter had ever done. The years transformed fear into deep friendship. What started as compassion for an injured creature evolved into genuine connection. They talked about everything: philosophy, physics, human nature, cosmic perspective. Ariel's telepathy meant no miscommunication, no pretense, just pure understanding flowing both directions. Old loneliness gave way to silent presence. Walter stopped feeling alone. Even when Ariel was in the basement and he was working in the barn, he felt the connection, a thread of awareness linking them, knowing someone understood him completely, knowing someone saw his growth and celebrated it silently. But the government drew closer with each passing year. Technology improved. Satellites became more sophisticated. Algorithms started identifying anomalies in old data. Walter noticed the searches becoming more focused, more persistent, more intelligent. They were learning, adapting, getting better at finding what they were looking for. By 2023, 40 years after the crash, Walter knew time was running out. He was 74 now. Ariel hadn't aged a day. The being's presence had kept Walter healthier than he had any right to be, but mortality was still inevitable, and the searches were intensifying. The circle was tightening. Something would have to give. The question was whether they'd be ready when it did. A government agent appeared on a cold morning. Walter was checking the fence line when he saw the car, unmarked but obvious. Dark sedan, tinted windows. The kind of vehicle that screams federal even when it's trying to blend in. His stomach dropped. He said he was investigating reports of strange lights. The agent introduced himself as Richardson, mid-40s, clean-cut, wearing a suit too nice for rural Montana. He smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. Professional. Just following up on some old UFO reports in the area. Routine stuff. "You been living here long?" Walter pretended not to know any information. 40 years, Walter said, keeping his voice steady. "Never seen anything strange. Just cows and coyotes." He met Richardson's eyes without flinching. Decades of protecting Ariel had taught him how to lie with his whole body, how to project innocent confusion. The agent insisted, probing every detail of the house. "Mind if I look around?" "Won't take long. Just being thorough." He was already walking toward the barn without waiting for permission. Walter followed, heart pounding, but face calm. Showed him the workshop, the tools, the machinery, everything normal, everything explainable. The old engineer sensed the threat in his gaze. Richardson's eyes were too careful, too observant. He wasn't just looking. He was measuring, analyzing, recording. The way he glanced at the ground, the trees, the sight lines. This wasn't routine. This was reconnaissance. That night, Walter heard footsteps in the forest. He was in the kitchen making coffee around midnight when he heard them. Deliberate. Multiple people trying to move quietly, but not quite succeeding. Branches snapping, equipment rustling. Walter killed the lights and moved to the window. Ariel confirmed telepathically that the government was approaching. "They're here, 4 of them. Thermal imaging equipment. They know something's unusual about this property. About you." The being's voice in Walter's mind stayed calm but carried urgency underneath. Walter tried to move the Gray to another hiding place. They'd planned for this, had backup locations. An old mine shaft 2 miles away, a cave system accessible only by a narrow trail, but moving now meant exposure, meant being seen, and Walter could feel them closing in. The agent returned with more men and flashlights. Walter watched from the darkened kitchen as vehicles arrived. 5 men total, Richardson directing them with hand signals. They were setting up a perimeter. Professional, coordinated. This wasn't investigation. This was extraction. They slowly surrounded the property. Lights appeared at the tree line, north, east, south, cutting off escape routes. Walter's breath came faster. 40 years of protection coming down to this moment. All the care, all the caution, and now they were here. Walter felt old fear resurge in his heart. The same panic from the night of the crash. The same terror of making the wrong choice. But different now because he had 40 years of friendship at stake. 40 years of teachings. 40 years of transformation that these men would destroy without understanding. Ariel touched his mind with serenity. Breathe, Walter. Remember what I taught you. Fear is just frequency. You can change it. We can change it together. Don't fear. Love always finds a way out. The words settled into Walter's chest like stones into water. Truth he'd learned over decades. Love was stronger than force. Consciousness was more powerful than weapons. He'd seen Jesus made of light. He'd felt his own heart open. He'd learned that reality responds to frequency. The sound of boots echoed through the trees, getting closer, methodical, inevitable. Walter heard Richardson's voice calling out, "Mr. Briggs, we know you're harboring something. Make this easy on yourself. Come out and talk to us." The confrontation was unavoidable. Walter looked at the basement door, at the stairs leading down to his friend, to the being who'd saved his life by letting him save its life, to 40 years of secret teachings and impossible friendship. He took a deep breath, changed his frequency from fear to love, and opened the door to face whatever came next. Because Ariel was right. Love always finds a way, even when men with guns and thermal imaging surround your home, even when the impossible is about to be exposed, even when everything you've protected for 40 years is about to be taken. Love finds a way. It always does. Walter guided Ariel along a secret trail behind the house. They'd practiced this route dozens of times over the years, every step memorized, every root and rock known by heart. But practice and reality were different things. Walter's hands shook as he held the flashlight. His breath came fast and shallow. The tall trees muffled the sounds of their pursuers, pine and spruce thick enough to break sight lines, branches dense enough to absorb voices and footsteps. The forest had always protected them. Tonight it would have to protect them one more time. Walter prayed it was enough. The gray walked with difficulty due to the situation's tension. Ariel usually moved with fluid grace, but now the being stumbled, caught feet on undergrowth. The stress was affecting even this advanced consciousness. Fear, Walter realized, was universal. Even beings from the stars felt it when hunted. The night was clear, illuminated by a thin moon. Not ideal. Walter would have preferred darkness, cloud cover, anything to hide their movement. But the sky was crystalline, stars sharp as broken glass. The crescent moon casting just enough light to make them visible if anyone looked the right direction. The agent shouted orders in the distance. "Spread out. Thermal shows 2 signatures moving northeast." Richardson's voice carried through the trees. Authoritative, certain. The voice of someone who believed capture was inevitable, who'd done this before and always won. Walter heard branches breaking behind them. Too close, too fast. The men were trained, equipped, young and fit, while Walter was 74 with bad knees and lungs that burned. They were gaining ground with every minute. Simple mathematics of pursuit. His aging body struggled to keep the pace. Each step sent pain through his joints. His chest heaved. Sweat poured down his face despite the cold. But he pushed harder, ignored the protests of muscles and tendons. 40 years of protection couldn't end because his body was failing. Ariel grabbed his hand to guide him better. The being's fingers closed around Walter's palm. Cool, steady, and with that touch came something else. Energy, strength, like Ariel was sharing some of its own vitality. Walter felt his legs steady, his breathing ease slightly. The contact brought an intense sensation of peace, more than physical support. A transmission of calm directly into Walter's nervous system. His racing heart slowed. The panic that had been building in his throat dissolved. He could think again, could plan, could remember that love was stronger than fear. The forest seemed to open a path for them both. Walter noticed it gradually. Branches that should have blocked their way bent aside. Roots that should have tripped them seemed to flatten, like the woods themselves were responding to their need, to their frequency. Walter remembered Ariel's teachings about consciousness affecting matter. A blue light appeared among the trees, faint at first, a glow between the trunks ahead, growing brighter as they approached. Not fire, Not flashlight. Something else entirely. Something that made the hair on Walter's arms stand up with recognition and hope. It was a remote access point left by Ariel decades before. After I healed, the being had explained years ago, I created this. Insurance. A doorway my people could find if I needed extraction. I hoped never to use it, but I'm grateful now that I prepared. The structure pulsed like a silent portal. Geometric patterns of light suspended in the air. No visible technology supporting it, just pure energy arranged in impossible angles. Beautiful. Alien. Humming at a frequency Walter felt in his teeth. The trees around it had grown in a perfect circle, like they'd been shaped by its presence. Walter helped his friend enter first. You go, Walter urged, practically pushing Ariel toward the light. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Flashlights swept through the trees. Richardson's voice closer now. Visual contact. Northeast clearing. Ariel stepped into the blue light and turned back. Come with me, Walter. The old engineer froze. Come with? Leave Earth? Leave Montana? Leave everything he'd ever known? His mind couldn't process it, couldn't imagine it, but his heart knew the answer before his brain caught up. He couldn't go. This was his world, his home, his place to stay and remember and teach what he'd learned. His role was here. It had always been here. I can't, Walter said. This is where I belong. The being's eyes reflected sadness and understanding simultaneously. I know. I just had to offer. Walter took a deep breath and stepped forward. Not into the portal, just close enough to embrace his friend, to wrap his arms around that thin gray frame one final time, to press his forehead against Ariel's smooth head and feel the consciousness that had saved him pulse with affection. Thank you, Walter whispered. For everything. Behind them, men crashed through the underbrush, 50 yards away, maybe less. Go, Walter said. Now. The old engineer pulled back and watched as Ariel stepped fully into the light. The being raised one hand in farewell. Walter raised his own, and then the blue light intensified until Walter had to look away. When he looked back, the portal was gone. Just trees and moonlight and the sound of Richardson's men arriving in the clearing with guns drawn and confusion on their faces. Walter stood alone in the center where impossible light had been. Where is it? Richardson demanded. Where's the entity? Walter smiled, actually smiled, felt joy bubble up in his chest like champagne. After 40 years of protection, his friend was safe, free, gone home. Gone, Walter said simply. You're too late. Richardson's face twisted with rage and frustration, but Walter felt only peace. He'd done what he was meant to do, protected something precious, learned what he was meant to learn, and now could live the rest of his days knowing he'd succeeded. They could arrest him, question him, lock him away. It didn't matter. Ariel was safe, and Walter Briggs was free. Inside the blue clearing, Ariel explained that it needed to leave. The portal had opened fully. Walter could see into it now. Not another place, another dimension. Space folded in ways his engineering mind couldn't comprehend. Lights and geometries that hurt to look at directly, beautiful and terrible simultaneously. My people are coming to get me. The words appeared in Walter's mind with finality. No more hiding, no more years in the basement. Ariel's time on Earth was ending, had to end. The being couldn't risk capture, couldn't let human governments access its biology or technology. Too dangerous, too destabilizing. Walter felt his heart squeeze like never before. Physical pain in his chest, not a heart attack, just grief. Pure condensed grief at losing the most important relationship of his life. The being who'd taught him about love, who'd shown him Jesus made of light, who'd transformed him from broken to whole. 40 years of companionship fit into one instant. All the conversations, all the late nights in the workshop, all the walks in the forest, all the teachings about frequency and consciousness and unity. 4 decades compressed into this single moment of goodbye. Walter wanted to say everything and found he couldn't say anything. The gray placed a harmonic sphere in his hands. Small, maybe 3 inches in diameter, perfectly smooth, warm to the touch. It glowed with soft internal light that pulsed in rhythm with Walter's heartbeat. Or maybe his heart was syncing with its pulse. He couldn't tell which. This amplifies love and clarity. Keep it close. When you feel lost, hold it. It will remind you of what you learned, will help you maintain coherent frequency. We'll connect you to the field of consciousness we accessed together. You won't be alone, Walter. You'll never be alone again." The light pulsed like a heart inside the sphere. Walter watched it throb, steady, eternal, like it was alive. Maybe it was. He didn't understand the technology, didn't need to, just knew it was precious, sacred, a piece of his friend to carry forward. Walter held the gift with reverence, carefully, like holding a newborn, like holding his brother's hand before they closed the casket, like holding something fragile and irreplaceable that might shatter if he squeezed too hard or break if he didn't hold tight enough. "You saved me when no one else saw light in me." His voice cracked. Tears blurred his vision. "I was dead inside, a ghost. You gave me back my life, showed me God never left, taught me how to love again. I don't know how to thank you." Ariel responded that Walter had healed it too. "You showed me human compassion is real, that fear doesn't have to rule, that beings can transcend their conditioning. I was dying when you found me, not just physically. I'd lost faith in your species. You restored it. We healed each other, Walter. That's what love does." Vibrant sound filled the clearing, a frequency Walter felt in his bones, in his organs, in the space between his cells. Not music, not noise, something else. The sound of dimensions touching, of reality folding, of a vessel arriving from somewhere human language had no words for. The invisible ship approached. Walter couldn't see it, but he felt its presence. Massive, sentient, ancient. The air pressure changed. His ears popped. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds. Something huge was descending into their shared space. The gray touched his hand one final time. Cool fingers wrapping around Walter's weathered palm. Consciousness meeting consciousness. 40 years of friendship transmitted through simple contact. Gratitude, love, respect, recognition. All of it flowing both directions without words. Remember, the divine was never far away. The final message, the last teaching, the truth that had taken Walter 40 years to truly understand. God wasn't in heaven looking down. God was here, now, always, in every moment of compassion, in every act of love, in every choice to see the sacred in the ordinary. Ariel disappeared in a silent beam, one moment solid and present, the next dissolving into light, not violently, gently, like mist evaporating in morning sun. The gray form became transparent, then translucent, then just afterimage on Walter's retinas. The blue portal collapsed inward, geometric patterns folding into themselves, light condensing to a point, then nothing, just trees and moonlight and cold Montana air. Walter stood alone holding a glowing sphere, proof that none of it had been imagination. He looked up at the stars through the branches. Somewhere up there, his friend was going home, safe, free, whole. The thought should have devastated him. Instead, Walter felt joy, pure, genuine joy. He'd done it, protected something precious for 40 years, learned what he was meant to learn, become who he was meant to become. The sphere pulsed warmly in his hands. He looked down at it, saw his own reflection in its surface, saw the man he'd become, 74 years old, tears on his face, smiling anyway, transformed, redeemed, alive. Walter Briggs walked out of that clearing a different man than he'd walked in. The government agents were still there, still searching, still confused. They'd question him, probably arrest him, but none of it mattered. He'd protected his friend, learned about love, touched the divine, and that was enough. That was everything. Walter returned alone to the silent house. The government agents had questioned him for 3 hours in that clearing, demanded answers he didn't give, threatened charges he didn't fear, finally let him go when they realized he had nothing they could use. No evidence, no confession, just an old man with dirt on his knees and peace in his eyes. The forest seemed different, as if it breathed with him. Walking back through those trees felt sacred, each step deliberate, conscious. The pines and spruce no longer felt separate from him. They were part of the same field, the same consciousness. He could feel their presence, slow and ancient and aware in ways he'd never noticed before. The agent never found any proof. Richardson searched the property twice more over the following weeks, brought equipment, ground-penetrating radar, electromagnetic sensors, found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Ariel had been thorough, the craft destroyed, the technology gone. Only the sphere remained, and Walter had hidden that where no machine would ever detect it. The old engineer kept the sphere in a secret location, behind the false wall in his basement workshop, the same place Ariel had stored the other artifacts. Walter visited it every morning, held it, let its warmth spread through his palms, felt the connection to his friend pulse like a living thing. The sphere never dimmed, never cooled, constant as a star. His friend's presence echoed in every corner of the house. Walter would catch himself talking out loud sometimes, sharing observations, asking questions, then smile at his own behavior. But it didn't feel crazy, felt natural, like Ariel was still there in some way, still listening, still present in the field of consciousness they'd learned to access together. Walter began living with more lightness and compassion. People in town noticed immediately. "What happened to you?" the woman at the general store asked. "You're different, happier." Walter just smiled. How could he explain? How could he tell her he'd spent 40 years learning about love from a being that fell from the sky? He remembered the teachings during each dawn. Every morning, Walter would stand at his window and watch the sun rise over the Montana hills, and he'd remember coherent love, frequency, consciousness affecting matter, Jesus operating at humanity's highest potential, all of it coming back in waves of understanding that deepened with each day. The guilt about his brother began to dissolve completely, not erased, transformed. Walter could think about the accident now without the crushing weight, could remember his brother with love instead of shame, could honor the loss without being destroyed by it. The guilt was releasing its grip. Finally, after 40 years, he walked the fields again without weight in his chest. Used to be, stepping outside felt like carrying stones. The land itself a reminder of failure, of isolation, of slow decay. Now the fields felt open, inviting, full of life and possibility. Walter walked for hours some days, just moving through space, feeling himself part of something vast and connected. The workshop became a place of silent prayer, not prayer like he'd learned as a child. No begging or bargaining or formal words, just sitting, being present, holding the sphere and letting coherent love flow through him. That was prayer. Presence, connection, opening to the divine that had never left. Small emotional miracles began to happen. His daughter called, first time in 5 years, just to talk, no reason, no emergency, just wanted to hear his voice. Walter cried after hanging up, the kind of tears that heal instead of hurt. Synchronicity. Ariel had taught him about that. How coherent frequency attracts matching frequency. Walter noticed synchronicities throughout his days, thinking of someone and having them appear, needing information and finding it immediately, asking questions internally and receiving answers through circumstances. The universe responding, not magic, just consciousness operating at higher coherence, attention creating connection, loneliness transformed into constant presence. Walter realized he hadn't felt alone in months. Even living by himself, even with Ariel gone, something had shifted. He felt connected to everything, the trees, the sky, the earth under his feet, other people, the field of consciousness itself. Solitude wasn't isolation anymore. It was communion. The old man was being reborn. At 74, Walter Briggs was experiencing something he'd thought impossible. New life, new understanding, new capacity to love and feel and connect. Age didn't matter. His body was old, but his consciousness was waking up, expanding, remembering what it had always been capable of. Autumn 2023 marked his definitive awakening. The leaves turned gold and red, the air grew crisp, and Walter felt himself turning too, shedding old skins, old beliefs, old limitations, becoming something he couldn't quite name but recognized as true, as real, as who he'd always been underneath the fear and guilt. He'd protected an alien for 40 years, and in doing so, had protected his own soul, had learned what love actually was, had discovered that divinity wasn't something you earned or deserved. It was something you opened to, something you became, something you already were if you just stopped running from it. Walter stood on his porch as autumn deepened, watched the sun set behind the mountains, felt the sphere pulse warm in his pocket, smiled at the beauty of simply being alive, present, awake, connected to everything. This was what Ariel had taught him. This was what Jesus had demonstrated. This was what every awakened being throughout history had tried to show humanity. Love is the answer, not as sentiment, as frequency, as technology, as the fundamental force that organizes consciousness and matter into forms of ever-increasing complexity and beauty. Walter finally understood, and understanding, he was free. On the last dawn of autumn, Walter held the sphere. He'd woken early, before the sun, felt called to the workshop in a way he couldn't explain, descended the basement stairs in darkness, sat on his old stool without turning on the lights, retrieved the sphere from its hiding place. A soft light illuminated the entire workshop, not from the sphere itself, from everywhere, from the air, from the walls, from Walter's own body. The same golden glow he'd seen years ago when Ariel showed him the vision of Jesus, but gentler now, more natural. Like the light had always been there and he was only now learning to see it. He felt his heart vibrate like never before, a physical sensation, his chest humming, resonating at a frequency that made his whole body warm, not painful, ecstatic, like every cell was remembering something ancient, something true, something that predated his birth and would continue after his death. The presence of Jesus returned as a living memory, not a vision this time, a knowing. Walter felt that consciousness as clearly as he'd felt it 40 years ago, that perfect love, that absolute clarity, that demonstration of what humans could become when they operated from their highest frequency. Jesus wasn't separate from him, never had been. Ariel appeared as a compassionate echo in his mind. You understand now, don't you? The being's voice, clear as when they'd spoken daily. Everything I showed you, everything we learned together, it was all pointing to this moment, this recognition. Walter realized protecting the being had been his first real prayer in decades. Not words, action, compassion in motion. Protecting something vulnerable, not because he had to, but because he chose to. That was prayer. That was faith. Not belief in doctrine, but demonstration of love regardless of cost or consequence. Compassion was faith in movement, not theory. All those years thinking he'd abandoned God. All that shame about not praying or going to church. But he'd been praying the whole time. Every act of kindness toward Ariel. Every choice to protect rather than exploit. Every moment of opening his heart despite fear. That was faith. Real faith. Living faith. He understood that God had never punished him. The accident, his brother's death, the decades of isolation, none of it was punishment. Just life unfolding. Consequences cascading. Choices creating circumstances. But not judgment. Not cosmic retribution. Just the natural flow of cause and effect in a universe that didn't operate on punishment and reward. It was he who had closed the door to the light. Walter saw it clearly now. God hadn't left. The light hadn't gone out. He'd shut himself off, locked himself away, built walls of guilt and shame so thick that divinity couldn't penetrate. Not because God was weak, because Walter's frequency had become so dense with pain that he couldn't receive anything else. Now, the light returned effortlessly, just through openness. No striving, no earning, no proving himself worthy. Just letting go, just softening, just saying yes to the love that had been waiting 40 years for permission to enter. The light flooded in because he finally stopped blocking it. The old engineer finally forgave himself. Completely, totally, without reservation or condition. Forgave himself for his brother's death, for the failed marriage, for the lost years, for every mistake and missed opportunity and moment of weakness. Forgave it all, not because it didn't matter, because holding on to it served no one. Love became his new way of existing, not something he felt occasionally, something he was, something he radiated, something that organized his thoughts and actions and presence in the world. Love as default frequency, as baseline state, as the truth underneath all the temporary forms consciousness takes. The sphere pulsed in harmony with his heart. Perfect synchronization. Walter couldn't tell if the sphere was matching him, or he was matching it, or they were both responding to something larger. It didn't matter. They were in resonance, in coherence, in the state Ariel had spent 40 years teaching him to access. Walter saw the divine within himself with absolute clarity. Not blasphemy, not ego. Simple recognition. The same consciousness that animated Jesus animated him. The same love that created universes beat in his chest. The same creative power that organized galaxies organized his cells. He was divine, had always been divine. could never be anything but divine. And he understood. God never abandoned me. I had moved away from love. The final recognition, the complete picture. God didn't come and go. Love didn't turn on and off. The divine was constant, eternal, unchanging. But humans had the power to close themselves off from it, to operate at frequencies so dense and contracted that they couldn't feel what was always present. Walter had spent 40 years away from love, not because love left, because he couldn't bear to feel it, couldn't stand the vulnerability, couldn't accept the grace. So he'd shut down, armored up, lived like a ghost. And then a being fell from the sky, crashed into his field, asked for help. And in helping, Walter had reopened, softened, returned to love, not through effort, but through surrender, through choosing compassion over fear, through saying yes when everything in him wanted to say no. The workshop glowed with golden light. Walter sat in the center of it, 74 years old, tears streaming down his weathered face, holding a sphere given to him by an alien friend, feeling Jesus and Ariel and God and love and consciousness all as one unified field. He'd come home. After 40 years of exile, he'd come home. And home wasn't a place. It was a frequency, a state of being, a choice to open instead of close, to love instead of fear, to trust that the universe was friendly even when life was hard. Walter Briggs had been broken, and in being broken, had been remade, transformed, awakened. And now, in the last years of his life, he finally knew what he was, what he'd always been, what every human was underneath the conditioning and trauma and fear. He was love, conscious, embodied, eternal. And nothing, not death, not loss, not decades of pain, could ever separate him from that truth again. The light pulsed, the sphere hummed, and Walter smiled.